At the time of recording this episode, the UK is in full crisis management mode following a recent budget announcement from our chancellor earlier this month. UK inflation and interest rates have reached record highs, while the sterling has reached a record low. It's been reported that in the UK economy, in just a matter of weeks, we've lost around 500 billion. Investors are losing confidence in our economy, and there are real concerns that we are heading for a longer and deeper recession. Why has this happened, and how are we going to turn this around? So definitely check this episode out to learn more about these recent events and our general thoughts on the challenges that we face today in the UK economy and our thoughts and predictions for the mid to long-term future.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Guys, good morning. Good morning. How is everyone doing? Let's do a quick check-in before we dive into today's topic. This might actually be the first time where we're having a conversation in real time about how the UK economy is in, call it a meltdown, right? And we're at a stage now in our lives where each and every one of us in some way or shape or form is probably going to be impacted or is impacted. It's not like 2008 when we were at university. So today's going to be a really, really interesting and serious conversation. And before we get into it and understand what's happening, why it's happened, let's, of course, check in with everyone and see how everyone's doing. I can see Olu is serious. He's checking his accounts. He's following the news. Why don't we start with you, Olu? How you doing?
I'm good. I think this is going to be a really interesting topic. As P mentioned, in most crises or crashes that we've seen in the market, we were very young. So at that time, all we were worried about was university, getting our grades. It didn't really impact us as much as I would say this one is or will. But apart from that, look, I'm good, right? I try not to... My emotions and my happiness is not dictated by the markets, because if that's the case, I'll be like a crypto, very volatile, one day up, one day down, based on different news. But yeah, life is good. Busy period at work. Just trying to get over that busy period. Yeah, that's me.
Sure. I'll leave myself and Daniel to go last for a particular reason. But sure, how you doing?
Yeah, all good, all good. Olu, I thought, with the recent clips about, that CFO bracket that you're in now, the energy would be a bit higher during these.
I feel like I need to clear that up.
No. Let's
there's been a lot of fake news. I think for the listeners that only saw the short Instagram clips, you need to listen to the full episode, because there's been a lot of fake propaganda being put out there by mainly P.
No, there's not news. Listen, there's not fake.
All I'm saying is
just claim it.
You work hard.
You're working at a level now. Your bag is at a certain level now.
Yeah.
And we're working harder like everyone else. Don't listen to P about bag. There's no pocket watching. We all earn different amounts. P's in that Swiss francs or whatever currency he earns out there. But yeah, don't listen to the propaganda. Go on, Shua.
Okay, well, everything Olu just said there, you need to fact check that as well. No, but on my side, all good. If I'm honest, there is a lot going on at the moment. I think there's a lot in the news that we can unpack. There's a lot going on in different companies around the globe. You're reading about job cuts and all of this stuff. I think it's natural that there's a bit of a roller coaster in people's thinkings at the moment. But I think during this time, it's just important to anchor on what we can control. And I think the last couple of days, just switching off the news actually, and just focusing on health, getting good sleep, all of this stuff, and then you suddenly see things turn back around. So no, looking forward to having this conversation with you guys, and it's great to see all of you again. And actually, with that, I think Daniel and P, I mean, you guys had the chance to see each other face to face, right? So how are you guys feeling?
Yeah, maybe I'll just go next. Daniel has gifted me with an incredible experience in the last week, something that I never saw coming. We've been planning to host the Johnsons, and we've been going back and forth and talking a little bit about how long, when, etc. And one thing I noticed is that Daniel wasn't giving me a date, even though we'd put some dates out. I said, look, October, and we'd spoken several times on the phone, and he had never said to me on the phone call a date. And I came off the phone thinking, Lauren, I don't understand what Daniel's doing. He's not giving me a date. I don't want to, maybe they can't make it, but he doesn't want to say. Was it Saturday evening? Daniel, Saturday evening, I'm seasoning the chicken. I'm in deep conversations with Lauren about what's going on in the markets, what was happening from now to the rest of the year. Daniel video calls me. I said, okay, I'll answer it after. But then calls for like 2 seconds and closes and puts the phone down. And then I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'll just finish season chicken. The doorbell rings straight after. And you know, when you just put your hand in your head and you think to yourself, no way, this can't be happening. And then Lauren says, why don't you go onto the door? And I was like, look, my knees were weak, my head was spinning, my heart was snatched, because I was thinking to myself, is this really happening? This guy has traveled with his family without me knowing, and I can't do anything about it. I go to the front door, I open it slightly. I didn't even want to open it at all. And there he is with his family. Jesse crawls in, and I swear to you, you talk about like an experience, magical, like it took me hours to get over it. So all I can say is thank you, Daniel, now, and thank you forever for that, because it was just a fantastic weekend with the family. It's been long awaited. We haven't seen each other in years as a family. And in typical Daniel fashion, he pulled off just an incredible move. I didn't see any of it coming, not a slightest. So yeah, I'm still in terms of how I'm feeling, I'm still riding off the high of that. The guys Daniel and the family could still be here now, would still be enjoying it. We could still be doing road trips. It was just incredible. So it's actually probably could set up for another episode to talk about the importance of bringing families together. So that's how I feel. And thank you, Daniel, for the gift.
Pleasure. But yeah, just on the back of that, doing good. Just come back from Switzerland with the family. So it was nice to see and have both families together in one room, and for the rest of the family to experience Switzerland. It's been nice to visit in the past, and P and I are on many road trips, or just conversing and thinking about how many times have I been to Basel. And I think this was the 5th time I'd been in consecutive years, from 2013, 14, 15, 16 was the gap. 16 was an anomaly. Then back in 2017, and then again in 2022. So it's been phenomenal. It's been nice as well just to see P and to surprise him in the way that we did. And Lauren and I had planned it from before even Ayan was born, but then we thought, Melissa and I thought it would be probably best to do it after he was born, so there wouldn't be too much stress on the family. But yeah, it was nice to pull it off. Got a nice 9-seater. Got a nice.
I do the surprising. I don't get surprised. That's my vibe.
So no, it's great. We could talk about it in another episode, go into more detail on how it was executed, and just the time that we were able to share and bond and spend as families.
I have to say, just from the outside seeing it, it looked like amazing family moments. And I want the world to know Daniel Johnson is back, and he's bigger than ever with regards to his travel account. And he's got Melissa and Jesse coming with him. And any country that you want this guy, just give him a text, and that's all that's needed. He's bringing the whole family.
Just give him
and
less
the drone
than 24
camera
hours
as well.
notice.
The drone's coming. The drone's coming as well.
Okay, guys, let's dive into what's happening now in real time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out about 6 to 7 headlines to set the scene, provide some context to our listeners, and then we can sort of dive into this conversation, because I would love to just sort of hear your thoughts, perspectives on everything that's going on as we speak. So in no particular order, listen to these headlines. The UK pound went crashing, falling to an all-time low against the dollar at 1.035. Our UK inflation is rising higher than our peers in the US, Japan, Eurozone, reported at between 8 to 10% and could even be higher. Unemployment falls to the lowest rate since 1974 at 3.6%. The recent announcement from the chancellor, which we're going to unpack further in this episode, has actually been the biggest tax cut since 1972. The amount of money printed into the UK system since March of 2020 is reaching close to £1 trillion. As we speak right now, the fixed mortgage products are being pulled from the market, and sort of lenders are waiting to figure out what they're going to price it as. So if you're looking to sort of buy a house now, you're probably going to be told there is no mortgage fixed rate for you. And the Bank of England intervened early this week on Wednesday and launched a 65 billion bond buying program to avoid a UK pension meltdown. I could go on and on and on. And the question is, what's happening to the UK economy? And yes, we want to open up. So maybe before we dive into what's happened as of recent in the last couple of months, do we want to talk a little bit about the 2020, 2021 trends, just to build up to where we are today? Because I think it's a tale of two different halves. Who would like to sort of share just some thoughts and perspectives on how we arrived at this point?
I can start off. So you're saying the 2020, I would even go further back, right? I think we've been in an environment where interest rates have been really low, right? And I think that's given everyone, and I think we've even discussed this on the podcast before when we've talked about stocks and properties, right? That how all these different investments and asset classes have been very attractive when interest rates have been very low, right? It's given everyone a false sense of comfort, a false sense of leveraging and using debt to really gain growth, right? And since everything has happened with sort of inflation, I'll say inflation has been the main thing, but COVID and then sort of inflation, we've seen that you can't just provide and print out free money. We've had to tighten, as we've mentioned also on this podcast before, that the best way to control inflation is through interest rates. So interest rates have gone up significantly. People are starting to see, hey, maybe these investments are not as lucrative, or maybe it's not the norm to be expecting 10, 20, 30% growth. If you look at it from a stocks and business element of it, is you can imagine if you're able to borrow money at such a low interest, you can put that money to work and be able to generate a higher return of interest than historically sort of the 2% that we've been seeing. If you look at it as property elements of it, you're able to lever up as much as you want, borrow and pay low, relatively low interest rates, right? So that's meant that these different assets have been inflating in terms of prices. We've seen such a massive increase in stocks in the last sort of, or prior to this year, excluding 2022, but in the last few years, we've seen massive increases. We've seen that also with property, we've seen massive increases there. But now that we're starting to get to those 6 to 10% interest rates, right, we're starting to see a real massive declining growth. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast when we were talking a few months ago, that my biggest fear has always been debt. And what does debt mean to us? And how, if that debt bubble bursts, right? And the way you burst that debt bubble is by making interest rates to such a high amount where it's not affordable. I think our parents' generations, they were looking at double digits interest rates. And I remember us talking about it. We're like, a few of our property gurus were saying it would never get to that amount, right? Now, if we look
is that
back,
what I said?
Yeah,
Let's
I
just be
don't
very clear.
remember.
I don't remember saying that.
I'll get Nandi to chop up. I'll get Nandi to chop up some of those
Please
for
do.
the
Please do.
content.
All I remember is since you got that CFO bag, you've changed, bro. But carry on.
Go ahead, Ollie, go ahead.
I'm not gonna expose some of us where we're flying to when the pound is dropping. You must be carrying that bag when you're able to fly when the pound is dropped. But no, back to what we were mentioning, right? We're starting to see really a massive pressure on how can we service these debts. And these debts are not just personal, so not us on this call, but also the government, because the government borrows a lot of money as well. But I think that's really the main dynamic, right? It's previous years interest rates were really low, which has meant businesses, individuals have been able to leverage debt to invest and get a better return than the low interest rates. Now we're starting to see a high interest rate environment, which is now forcing people to say, okay, am I really getting the right return for these investments? Because there's something called the risk-free interest rates, right? If I can leave my money in the bank and get, I know before we were talking about savings account getting only 1%, 2%, or even 0 point whatever. If now I can leave it in the bank and get, or the bank rates are higher where it's like 2, 3, 4%, and that's backed by the government, so it's more secure. Now, if I'm going to give you my money, it needs to demand a significantly higher return for the risk that I'm giving you. So yeah, I think that's sort of the economics background, but I let the other guys open up and add.
Sure, Daniel, any thoughts on sort of previous years? Any sort of major significant headlines you wanna pull out and share?
I think from my end, I think Olu, you've really covered some of the key historical references. I think generally speaking, I think we are, and we probably have been approaching the last couple of years, the end of a cycle. And the last recession that we had, at least in the UK and globally, you can say was around 08, 09. And then since then, yeah, everything was just going up and to the right after a significant decline back then, and now we're basically at that same stage. Of course, the baselines are a little bit higher than before, but we've seen a reduction in equities, we've seen a reduction in other asset classes, and property will be coming during the next however many months. So I think it's an end of one cycle, which we don't know at the moment where the bottom is, and probably the bottom is still far from where we are today, even though things look quite tough. But that's probably the general message in terms of the historical context. We're just at the end of another cycle, and we're just wading through the bottom at the moment. And it could get a lot worse, and it probably will get a lot worse from where we are today. But let's see, and I guess we'll discuss about some of those things in today's episode.
I think Joel hit a term that was very key for the listeners and for us all to remember. We're in a cycle. It's been a long time coming, but one thing is, this is not the first time, and this will not be the last time we go through such a global exercise as we're experiencing now. The business cycle, and it's inevitable that we have to go through the inflationary period because of the way the economy grows and the state of affairs currently. Of course, there are many external circumstances that are coming into play, and coupled with just the rising rate of living costs as well. And this is just one of them that are coming into play. In 2008 and 2009, we saw the collapse of the Lehman Brothers. We saw the whole of how the swap market, OTC products were just being created and, cause a detrimental effect to the economy and all the ramifications that followed suit. And this is just another example of that. We're much older, so we can really experience it in real time because we have responsibilities of our own, whether it's through homes, whether it's through paying bills. We are experiencing firsthand. And sometimes we may magnify or amplify it because it's us. Maybe in 2008, we weren't doing such because we didn't have those responsibilities. But what I see is that through 2020, 2021, and this year, we saw the pandemic hit the equity market. Prices fell drastically, up to 70% in some industries, and they started to pick up again in June in Q3. That continued into 2021, and as lockdown and restrictions eased, things started to normalize to some degree. However, when we came into this year, with all in the UK, with all the COVID relief plans and all the money that was given out and introduced into the market, the ramifications and the cracks started to show. And what we saw on September 5th was the announcement of a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. And her running mate, Rishi Sunak, had a very different philosophy and a very different plan should he succeed as Prime Minister. I think one thing, although he was portrayed as a guy to come from a privileged background, he warned of the dangers and refused to take part in more free things if you were to vote for him. He wasn't afraid to raise taxes either, and that was against the party's culture. Essentially, he didn't mind raising taxes against the party's philosophy if that meant getting the job done. Essentially, there's no such thing as a free school meal, and we're seeing that now. And I don't want to get ahead of myself in terms of what the mini budget last Friday, the 23rd of September, announced and what that entailed and how that's going to happen. But those are just my thoughts. It's a cycle. We're coming to the end of a cycle. We're going to start a new cycle, but it's frightening, because there are many people that are going to be. I think we'll all be affected, and some, we live in an unequal world, so some are going to be less off and more impacted than others.
One of the things I said to myself, I used to wonder when I was younger, this term, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I used to wonder, how does that exactly work? And I think if you've been paying attention since 2020, you can exactly see how that plays and comes into effect. But the question, you guys have all summed up, previous years really, really well. And I think a lot of this is basic economics 101. And if we go back to 2020, where they launched a QE program, quantitative easing, and I think printed of around 500 billion, maybe more. If I asked you at that time, what do you think the effects will be? I think we would have been able to predict, look, interest rates are going to rise to probably record highs in the next 12 to 24 months. So, a lot of what we're seeing today was actually expected. And I think many experts in the market would have been able to anticipate what we're seeing, because ultimately, I like to use the analogy like the economy is like a sponge and water, right? So the sponge represents assets, business, services, trade. And as you're pouring more money into the system, you're like pouring more water into the bucket. And in order to absorb that water, you have to basically increase those services, those assets, and where we saw the prices going up. So, but I think what's interesting is although interest rates, inflation is going to increase, and the only tool that the Bank of England has to control that is interest rates. I think witnessing it and being a part of it, I think for us for the first time is perhaps how do we navigate through this, right? Is in terms of our generation. I think we're going to come on to a little bit in terms of how this impacts the everyday person, the investor, and also the businesses as well. So maybe just go ahead.
Just as you mentioned that about predicting it, there's a running joke goes back many years that experts and economists have successfully predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions.
9 of the last 5. Wow.
No, the joke is they've predicted 9. They've successfully predicted 9 of the last 5, meaning they're not experts.
Okay, so
you get it? Okay, let that sink in and you'll get it. They predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions.
Where's the source? Where's this from? Which
it's a running joke.
I think
it was Paul Samuelson. It's a running joke. But yeah, anyway, continue.
Any last thoughts and considerations before? Because I think the trigger has actually been, right, since Liz Truss, to your point, has been announced as new Prime Minister earlier this month. Kwasi Kwarteng has then come in as a new chancellor. Before we get onto his announcement, which has basically been the trigger for a lot of things that we've seen, any other thoughts and considerations that you wanted to share about previous years leading up to where we are now? Because at the same time, when I look at 2020, I can actually understand the dynamics. If you have the COVID, which shuts down businesses, consumer spending, I think the Bank of England even at one stage was saying we want to welcome negative interest rates to stimulate the economy. So it's a little bit like what's happening is inevitable. I think it's how quickly does the Bank of England respond, and what do we as consumers do with our spending or saving or things of that nature. But any other consideration or highlights from previous years before we really sort of tackle what's happening now, and where do we go?
I think we're going to talk. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about lots of different points, right? And we can talk about how the Chancellor and Liz Truss announcements have accelerated some of the things that we're seeing right now. One of the things I would just like to point out to you guys and the listeners, right, is when we talk about the pound, and especially the pound versus the dollar. Mm-hmm. This has been falling since 2008, right? So let's not think about it as something that's just, if you go on Google, just look at pound versus the dollar, zoom out, you'll see from 2008, it's slowly been declining, right? So let's not think that this is just something where it's just happened recently. The pound and many other countries' currency has been declining in comparison to the USD for more than 5-6 years. So don't feel like it's just a recent thing, because I think when I listen to the news, I always try to be objective as much as possible, right? And not just listen to propaganda and, oh, these people have just come in and just ruined the pound. No, it's been happening since 2008. Yes, they might have accelerated it, right? But let's not be confused, right? The previous prime minister told us to buy a kettle to deal with inflation. So rightly, wrongly so, right? You gotta do some sort of action. I think the jobs that they're doing is very difficult, and we'll talk about the pros and the cons to everything, because I think nothing is either just all positive or all negative. There's pros and cons to every element of it, and just understanding the logic and how you can navigate is really important.
Okay. No, great. No, thank you, Olu. I think we're sharing some great insights and perspectives. So in order for us to kick into sort of implications for the everyday person investor, what we see coming in the next 6, 8, 12 to 18, 24 months, I'll just share some sort of key points from the Chancellor's announcement, which has kind of been the trigger, right? But then we also have our own perspective around this as well. So in an effort to, I'll say, prioritize growth, what they call is the mini budget, which apparently we're not supposed to call the mini budget, set out the following, and is actually going to cost an additional 60 billion. So the 45 additional income tax band for those earning £150,000 or more is said to be scrapped. The 40% higher rate charged on incomes above 50,000 will remain. They'll bring the cut forward on a basic rate of income tax from 20 to 19% as of April 2023. The proposed 1.25% point on national insurance rise introduced earlier this year will be cancelled. The banker's bonus cap will be scrapped. the corporation tax, which was going to increase from 19 to 25%, is going to remain at 19%. Reversing this, they said that's going to actually put 19 billion back into the UK economy, hopefully to then reinvest, create jobs, raise wages, pay dividends, etc. They've also said that there'll be no stamp duty to pay on now £250,000. It was previously 125. And the threshold for first-time buyers will rise from 300,000 to 425,000 pounds. Those are really the key points that came out of the Chancellor's announcement. Anything I've missed that you maybe want to add or just to clarify?
Yeah, maybe just the mini budget will cost 45 billion. I think you mentioned 60 billion. So just
sorry, you're right. 45 billion. The 60 billion actually is the Bank of England's intervention earlier this week, right? So that's all that effectively is. There's more printing. 65 billion, just to be correct. So once that was announced, then we started to see a trigger of events. One of them was the pound falling to all-time low against the dollar at 1.035%. And now there's been discussions about, the economy is at risk with this plan. There's even discussions about if Liz Truss is even going to last. So it's really been, really, really strong headlines. Kwasi himself has said that he's standing behind his economic plan. And there are pros to some of these plans, and there are also some drawbacks. So maybe to start with, what was your kind of reaction to what you heard? And what do you think? What's your initial reaction?
I want to just open this up for Daniel, because Daniel has been active on Instagram and social media. Daniel's normally very laid back.
It's because quiet. I was posting in Switzerland. That's why.
He's normally doesn't post anything unless you're on his close friends and it's like his family or very scenic views. The last few weeks, Daniel has been posting a lot of economic news. So I want Daniel to start off because I feel like he's got a lot of good points.
Okay, no, fine. No, just I was just on the posting spree. I kind of go through my peaks and troughs of when I post, and given I was in Switzerland, I just thought it was more of a time for me to post of what I observe. And I always think it's good for people to be educated on what's going on and how it affects them and their daily lives. But going back to last Friday, I from 9:30, I was sitting on the couch with Jesse, and we watched the mini budget. The first Black Chancellor of the UK came to make a statement. And what I observed from the tax breaks and tax relief was it was really a case of for the rich. There was nothing that was really there that would help people on lower incomes. The big tax cut, the banking bonuses, no limit on what they can be awarded for their annual bonus, and which at the same time I can understand because they want people that are higher earners to stay in the UK. With Brexit, many companies relocated their headquarters. Many people moved overseas. And just for context, I hope everyone with everything that's going on can understand why I wanted to move to the US. Not because, well, actually the US has got 6% mortgage rates, but anyway, that's besides the point. But what I saw, there were many things that really were benefiting the rich. And what transpired over the next 72 hours is during the Asia opening hours on Sunday night, Monday morning our time, that's when the pound plummeted. And the logical and smart individual would be thinking, how is the UK or how are we going to pay for it all? There's no such thing as a free lunch. You've heard me say that phrase over and over again, and it's the truth. And what we've seen in this past week, the week commencing the 26th of September, we've seen a lot of tension between the Bank of England and the government. You've seen the Bank of England who are trying to control inflation, which is the rate at which prices increase, versus the government of Liz Truss. And just for a quick breakdown, when the Bank of England, I think Olu mentioned it, when the Bank of England raise interest rates, that gets people spending and borrowing less and saving more, which puts less pressure on prices and inflation falls. And Liz and her government have ultimately done the opposite. They want to keep the economy going, which is going to continue to put prices up. The Bank of England wants to intervene, which will force that hand in continuing to increase interest rates. And as Olu said, that's going to cause a huge bubble to burst. And that's going to have an effect on mortgages. It's going to have an effect on your mortgage repayments and ultimately going to cause the prices of houses to fall. And it also makes your holidays more expensive. I spent the last week in Switzerland. I could definitely see the pound's value was next to none. It was like being on parity. And what we saw earlier in September actually was the euro and USD will reach parity for the first time, I believe, in over 20 years. So whilst the UK has got its own challenges, look at the JPY, Japanese yen, against the dollar, as Ollie mentioned. Look at the euro against the dollar. It's all been on a decline. But I think just this mini budget, I think everyone was expecting, with Liz Truss being announced Prime Minister, she had mentioned she had some tax programs that were going to come into play that were going to help everyone with the cost of living crisis. We saw that with what she introduced for the cap on energy prices up to 2,500 up until January. And that's also been, I think the Russia-Ukraine tension has had a part to play in that. Not to say that's the biggest part, because let's be honest, this was happening before that Russia-Ukraine crisis. But we're just seeing things accelerate and be magnified. And like with all headlines, when you reach record lows, you're going to make big headlines, because the pound has been on a downward decline, but it was the first time it reached the lowest level in over 37 years, I think of March 1985. It's going to create a headline. I just think there are many things that are going to happen, many things to unpack. But what I saw from those announcements is it's the rich getting richer. Kwasi Kwarteng has been having meetings with senior leaders at a lot of the big banks, L&G, Legal & General, Citigroup, Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, and all those others to try and really persuade and convince them. There's even been rumors that he's having to persuade and plead for his own party to get behind their plan, because otherwise it's going to create some rift. And even the latest polls have shown, for the first time ever since the 90s, Labour have a 33-point lead.
Yeah.
On November 23rd, Kwasi Kwarteng expects to set out his medium-term fiscal plan, but people are saying that that's too long away. They want reassurance. They want him to continue to communicate what he's doing and what's happening, because the Bank of England even stepped in earlier this week to introduce 65. They committed 65 billion through UK government bonds, through gilts, similar to treasuries in the US. So they're going to be buying £5 billion a day for the next 13 weekdays in an emergency move to calm the markets. And this is hopefully going to reassure lenders, especially mortgage lenders, who removed over 700 to 800 products overnight earlier this week.
And pension funds.
And pension funds. Let's not even get into that. But I'll pass the mic over. So
just quickly, because I think Dan, you shared it was a great take. A question to you all to then take. Do you think since the Chancellor's announcement there has been an overreaction? Because prior to his announcement, we already printed around 800 billion. And then you've got his plan, which basically costs 45 billion, which in the grand scheme of things is very small to what we've already printed, but everything seems to seem as if this announcement was the one that sent our economy left. And Olu has been talking a little bit about, guys, pay attention, the pound has been falling. So do you see a necessary response in the market or shock compared to where we're coming from?
Yes. And I think the way the market, not even market, I call it human psychology, is we never correctly respond to anything. We saw during COVID, we overreacted in terms of inflating a lot of assets and everything. In terms of this decline and drop, again, I think we're overreacting in terms of how much it's dropped, right? So I always say increases, they always say when everyone is greedy, be fearful, because human beings and the crowd will overreact and inflate something up. And when everyone is fearful, especially when it drops to significant amounts, most times we overcorrect. So yeah, that answers your question. But I wanted to go back on. Yeah, go on.
Go ahead, Olu, and then I can.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back on. Let Daniel go, and then I'll go back to what someone.
I think Olu, you're very right on that point about the fear and the overreaction. I just want to give a quick example. Last week, the FOMC in the US were they increased the Fed increased their interest rates by 0.75 basis points, so 0.75%. And before that announcement, there were rumors that they were going to increase it by a full basis point by 1%. And before that, when there were rumors that's going to increase to 1%, the markets rallied. At the time of just before the announcement, it went stable. Then when they reduced by 0.75, the markets declined. And it's funny because there was 1% which hasn't been done for a long time in the US, but markets were rallying. And just before the announcement, it was flat. And then when it didn't go to 1% and actually 0.75, which is better for them, you know, things started to sell off again. So we kind of, you know, it's kind of, you know, sell, was it buy the fear, sell the news, or something like that? Buy the news, something that I can't forget, I forgot the analogy, but it's just that's a very, you know, pertinent example of Olu's point of the psychological element of these announcements and how things play out.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to sort of the announcement, right? I think the first thing I'm going to say, just my personal opinion, is that it wasn't the right announcement for the environment and what we need right now.
Okay.
I think I just want to clearly first state that, right? But before I sort of break down and understand the logic, because I always try to put myself in people's shoes to understand, okay, why are people doing things? What is the pros? Yeah.
Olu, you disagree with what the chancellor has stated. That plan, you don't agree with the plan.
I don't agree with the plan because, again, it gives free money. I think it's the conversation that we've had about free money. When you put money into the economy, what it typically does is either inflates assets, where we're trying to slow down the inflation, or it just slows down the correction that we need. But I understand why, and the logic of, like, I understand why everything happened in terms of the rationale behind it. So the first thing you've got to understand is everyone won based on this announcement. Now, the reason why I say everyone won based on this announcement is there were tax break and tax reliefs at all scales, low earners, high earners. The reason why the higher earners felt more of the benefit is because they pay more taxes.
Of course.
So that's why
people always forget that. People always don't talk about that.
People don't talk about that. So everyone benefited from this, right? So it's just the richer benefited more because they pay more taxes in that sense, right? Again, I don't agree with them doing that. I don't think they should have given a break for
I want to come on to that
at
point.
least tax for the poor or the rich. Now, the next thing is in terms of the energy caps, right? Previously, we were talking about it could easily reach 80% increases, 100% increases in certain cases. They've capped that out. I think it's around 27% is what the cap is there, right? Now, again, I believe they should have done something to help people really at the lower end, right? People that can't afford to heat their homes have to decide between eating or heating. I don't think they should have given a benefit to the rich where, again, they're not struggling when it pays the energy bills. Now, you got to ask yourself, why did they do this? So a lot of times when you think about the market in economics, it's a history lesson. Lots of things that are happening. This is not the first time it's happened. So there's something called the Trickle-Down Economics. And this was done previously in like the 1980s, I believe, within the Reagan era. It was also done in 2001 with George Bush in the recession that we had then, right? And what this really means is whenever a government is trying to grow, so see growth year over year, what they try to do is say, we're going to give tax breaks to our population, our citizens, so that they can end up spending and growing the economy through growth,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that is their thought process behind it is we want to get growth. So how do we do that? We can't get growth through innovation, which for me is the best way to get growth, innovation, right? That's more of an organic way of creating it. Instead, we're going to say, let's give the rich, let's give the lower class more money so they can continue spending into this economy. Now, we know what that's going to do is continue to inflate the market. That's not what we want to see. But that is the logic of why they're trying to do this, is this thing called trickle-down economics. Now, if you look at this trickle-down economics, again, there's pros and there's cons to this. The pros, which we saw in 2001 and the 1980s, is that there were growth. Growth did happen after they gave this trickle-down tax relief. The negative element of it, which we've seen previously and will continue to see, is the growth happens in the 1%, the rich. So the rich will continue winning because of the fact that they own these assets. And even though we can look at, we've talked about the pound dropping, we talked about pension funds dropping, we've talked about equities dropping, we talk about property dropping. Who owns most of that? So a lot of the media is talking about, oh, the rich have gained so much money. Let's also be honest, during this period of time and this massive decline, the rich have lost also a lot of their wealth during this particular time, which again, I think is rightly so. We need more equity to be spread out. But the media won't talk about that element of it as, hey, the people that have seen the most decline in 2020 in terms of their net worth or the amount that they own is actually the rich. You see Amazon shares drop, so Jeff Bezos' worth has dropped. These business owners has dropped, etc. But the problem is when it does get corrected, because of the mentality of the rich, whereas even during this decline, I'm still going to invest. I'm still going to buy these assets at a lower price. In 10, 20 years, when we see this correcting, they're going to have the mass share of that growth as well. And that's the problem with that trickle-down economics is, yes, everyone gets money. Obviously, the rich get more proportion because they pay more taxes. But when it comes to the growth and the increase, we see that the rich also earn more or develop more during this downturn and upturn.
Great take, Olu, and great insights. Shuo, your thoughts on some of those? Was there anything in the Chancellor's announcement that made you say, I don't quite understand this part, or I don't see how this is going to work, or actually I see the positive, but there's maybe a short-term squeeze, short-term pain, long-term gain? What was your take?
So I think from my perspective, I actually think the objective of what they're trying to achieve in terms of jump-starting the economy and going for growth, I think that's the right objective. I think the question mark is really the timing of it. And I think this is where Liz Truss tried to differentiate herself from Rishi Sunak during the Conservative election process, where Rishi Sunak's priority was, let's get inflation under control first, and then we'll do the tax cuts afterwards. Whereas Liz Truss ultimately was positioning herself differently by saying, I'll do the cuts now, I'll do the gas energy price cap now, I'll do all of this now. And I think this is why we're having the implications that we're at now. So going to your question, Pete, I personally think it was the right objective to go for growth, but it was the wrong time. And now inflation has become a big problem. And I think everyone has realized during the last few months, if they didn't know before, but inflation really does affect everyone and disproportionately affects the people on lower incomes more. So I think it's also important for people to understand the context, because the policy, has been made, but what is the context? The context is that the Conservative Party are at the end of being in power for almost 12 years. Based on the latest polls, I think Daniel mentioned it earlier, if there was a general election tomorrow, they will likely lose that election. So if you're in that position where you've given power for the last couple of years, what will you do to try and consolidate that power or to try and win that for a few more years? So it's very easy to then see why they would propose to do the tax cuts and everything now, despite the fact that from an economic standpoint, it just doesn't make sense based on what we're seeing. So it's an interesting announcement. The timing probably was terrible, and we're seeing from the market reaction all the implications. If they really want to jumpstart growth, then probably they need to look at other reforms rather than doing tax cuts, providing maybe cheaper childcare to people, or providing visas for high-skilled workers, or grants for R&D innovation. Maybe these are things that come later on, but to do this at this point, I personally think it's more of a political decision rather than an economic one.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great way of putting it into perspective and framing it, because I think one of the responses from the other party was, thank you, Liz Truss and her team, for reversing what we've done in the last 12 years. And when you listen to it and you read it, comes across as two parties fighting each other versus what's best for the country. Because when I look at how much money has been printed into the system, economics and history tells you the one way that you actually pay that back is to actually keeping taxes where they are or increasing them. You don't lower taxes, because then you have to find other ways to pay that back. So I like what you said, Chiwo, in the sense of they have the right ideas, but it's coming at a wrong time, maybe too soon in the situation. Great. Any other thoughts around this announcement that you guys want to highlight? What do you see, I guess, for what's coming up, right? Go ahead, Olu.
So it sounds like from the four of us, none of us trust Liz Truss. Is that what the outcome of this sort of episode is?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm not looking at it as who do I trust. I think I'm looking at more from a policy standpoint and what makes sense to get the country back into a position of growth. It could be anyone, right? Liz Truss or anyone in her party that could have announced this. And so, to what Shuel said very neatly is, I can understand what they're trying to do in terms of, let's try to foster more jobs. Let's try to ensure that salaries are healthy and can attract more foreign investment. But it's probably too soon, because no one's talking about what we need to pay back. And that for me is how interest rates and rising taxes is how you actually control inflation. So do we trust Liz Truss? Do you trust anyone that is standing there saying, "Mr. Speaker"? I don't know. That's
the fundamental question. I think. Do you trust anyone that's in kind of your leader? You don't. There's always an element of caution, because the agenda is always bigger than what we know, what we see. They're essentially just a puppet. I'm not going to try and turn this episode into a conspiracy or controversial episode, but it's just, how much can you trust someone who, when you see politicians, put it this way, it's hard. It's easy for a lead to make promises they can't keep when there's an election around the corner. They want your vote, they want your buy-in, and as soon as they're in power, they can do a complete U-turn. Would you kick them out? No. So
we saw that with Brexit. There was a lot of promises in terms of how much money we'll be able to claim, and then certain individuals didn't have an answer once Brexit was confirmed. We know who that is. And that also speaks on to the leader of the Labour Party. He is he's known for wanting to kill buy-to-let landlords. That's going to get a lot of headlines. That's definitely going to raise a number of votes. So it's true in what you're saying, Daniel.
I think so. In terms of, for the listeners or even just the future, right? And I think we discussed this before, but I can see it's going to get worse, right?
Let's talk predictions. Yep.
So, go on, Daniel.
No, I was going to say, I think there was a few episodes ago where we spoke about something along these lines, and we went around and asked what opinions were. I said it's going to be a bumpy, rough ride. Buckle up. And you all laughed at me, but it's the same stuff.
No. I don't know if we laughed.
I wasn't laughing at the message. It was the delivery, Daniel. But
the delivery. This is,
and I personally love the delivery. So
I think we said, we don't see growth until, at that time, the middle of 2025. And there were actually a few experts that agreed with us.
We need to clip that episode over
archives.
I think I was.
I said
the longest time for us to recover, and I think I mentioned the issue around debt on that episode in terms of debt is our biggest problem.
Hey Nandi, pull up the thing, man.
But we'll do some flashbacks.
I know that there's experts out there that agree with my predictions. But anyways, we've got new predictions now. Go ahead.
In regards to where do I see things going, right? I think the Bank of England have already stated that in November they're going to increase interest rates again, right?
Base rate is going to be.
So what does this really mean for us, right? I think we can expect the next 1 to 2 years minimum that we're going to still be in a high interest rate environment. I think what does that mean for us as individuals is it's just going to be more expensive to purchase anything that you want. If you're looking to purchase a property, you're going to have to pay a significantly larger amount to it. I think someone did a calculation and said, based on the interest rates in the beginning of the year to now, people that were able to afford a £500,000 house is the equivalent to like 350k house now, based on the way the price increases and how much you're paying on interest rates in terms of the increase from when it was like 2% to now when it's like 6 or 7%. So I think the next few years,
Oli, you still see house prices going up?
I do. The reason why I think, I don't see it having a massive decline, and I'll tell you the reason why, me personally, is because the difference between now and 2008 is there was a lot more stress test on affordabilities of houses.
Now versus then. Yeah.
Versus then. Right. So what that meant is that people that are paying, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have less disposable income in terms of now more of your money is going to either go to rent or to your mortgage payments. But I think the difference between stocks and properties is people have to to decide to sell it at a lower price. And I think because so many people are so used to the prices it used to be, I don't see someone saying, hey, I bought a house for 100K last year, now I'm going to sell it for 50K.
Okay, let
They'll rather
me
just hold on.
share my thoughts.
They'll rather hold on to it. So in terms of for our listeners, I think the key things you need to focus on is, one, as much as you can do job security. So I think that's going to be one of the important ways. Now, job security is very difficult because as we go into recessions, unemployment is going to be a big factor. So the way you do that is, how do you make yourself more less disposable when it comes to your income, your role? How do you improve your skill sets? How do you update your CV, etc.? Second thing is, how much variable debt do you have in your family, your household? Are you able to lock them down to fixed interest rates? So that will alleviate some of the increases. Are you able to clear down any massive debts? So if that's debts at a high place, if you've got credit card debts, any high variable debts, try to reduce that as soon as possible. And then the last thing, which I know is very difficult and there's a lot of uncertainty right now, is invest whilst things are dropping and reducing. And the reason why I say that is, in the last few years, our generation have pretty much complained about how everything is higher. Everything is going up, up, up. Cost of equities are going up. Cost of houses have gone up. If you start to see a massive decline, especially in quality, and the key thing I'm mentioning here is quality assets. So when I say quality assets, that could be property, that can be some of the top companies like Apple, Amazon, or even the S&P 500, right? Those sort of quality assets. If you start to see a decline in there, use this as an opportunity to purchase it. Now, I'm not saying take out all your money and put it into it, even if it's £100 a month, whatever amount that you have spare, try to invest as we see this cycle sort of slow down and decline, because you'll definitely benefit when we start to see a correction, even if that's in 10 years time. Yeah, so that's sort of my advice. Again, this is my personal opinion and my personal advice, not your financial advisor.
That's true.
Please
Yeah,
seek
it's important to
financial
mention that.
advice if you want to do anything when it comes to your personal finance.
No, great, Olu. Thanks for sharing. I agree with you in some areas. In some areas, I have a difference of opinion. I think I agree with you in the sense of unemployment. If we're starting to really see some rumbles, headlines of unemployment with big corporations around the world. I think the final nail in the coffin for a deep and long recession is unemployment. It's not something that's been spoken about enough in the last couple of years. Whereas we maybe predicted, back to growth in 2025, I think we should just be on the safe side and assume at least 36 months of having to go through a bumpy period. I think we will see a drop in house prices. I think we'll see a correction, not a crash, of up to about 20%, because I don't see any other way of the property market operating given what we're seeing in terms of interest rates. So I think to your point, Olu, the issue what we're having now is affordability of payments is the issue, but the prices will have to be reflected in the fact that we're in a high interest arena. I'm looking at the market now, the market that I'm in, sellers are still putting on the property at the same price as they had maybe a year ago, but there is not going to be 20, 30 people lined up around the corner wanting to buy, right? So that, therefore, if they want to sell, it has to come down. There's going to be about 2 million people.
On that one, right? I would agree with you with the logic of the numbers and the calculation don't make sense if it wasn't individual selling it. So let's say, for example, yourself, you've just purchased a property. You purchased some properties in the last few years. Would you sell any of them for 20% less?
No, but now you're talking about someone that holds on to the assets versus, let's say I'm a homeowner that wants to sell. I can't sell it for the price I would have got it for last year.
Now, let's talk about homeowner. Yeah.
And let me I maybe focus on more on home ownership rather than maybe the investor, the buy-to-let investor, because 2 million people by the end of this year are going to experience switching. Their mortgage rates are going to change drastically because they're on a variable rate. They're going to be saying to themselves, "I can't afford this moving forward. I have to sell," and then they're going to have to sell at a discounted price.
So the two things that I think you're not factoring into is, one, how well banks did in terms of checking affordabilities. So either what they will need to do is either increase the length of their
Olu, on an 8 to 9% interest rate. We're talking about a different arena now. I agree with you. Go on, okay.
So the first thing they could do is, because my brother had to go through this, so the affordability, what they did is, you might have previously only had a 20 years loan thing. What they do is increase it to 30 years. So then that way your payments will drop down significantly. And secondly, let's say, for example, that person now sells the property. It doesn't solve the issue. They need to now purchase another property. And let's be honest,
interest rate.
Most people, you're going to always have to pay that interest, the 8%, which either your own home or in the new home that you decide to purchase. And the question I have for you is, anyone that's purchased it 5-10 years ago, your loan to value is going to be quite low because of the fact that banks make sure that your loan to value is significantly lower. So what this is going to do, I think, instead of having people, especially homeowners, selling, is going to have people staying longer, which then also reduces the amount of houses on the market. Because if I now sell, that means what I can afford is now smaller than what I currently was previously living in. And let's be honest, how many people are telling their wives, their kids, oh, we're going to downsize even more? It's not going to happen.
When you haven't got a choice, you haven't got a choice. But I like what you said. I don't want to challenge that. I think the thoughts are clear on either side. Let's switch to Shuo and Daniel, and let's see how that plays out. But great takes, I think, from us on that. Shuo, any thoughts on how you see it over the next 6 to 12, 18 months?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I would do is I'd recommend to the listeners. So we actually did an episode at the end of July, which was already feels like a lifetime ago, but was only 2 months ago. And the episode was titled, "Are You Ready for a Recession?" And then in that episode, we discussed how we were probably already in a recession. And at that point, it will only get worse. And I think what we recommended at that episode is probably the same thing that I would recommend now. The things will probably get tougher. Inflation will continue to increase. Interest rates will go up. And this will have a financial implication on a lot of households. I think during this time, it's just important to review personal finances, continue to invest in yourself, continue to invest in your skill set, and also make sure that everyone around you is aware that you are doing that as well, because it will definitely be choppy waters between now and then. But that's the best that we can do, and just focusing on what we can control individually versus what's coming up on the news, because the news typically makes things sound probably a lot worse than it does. I know we've spent this episode talking about what's been going on in the UK, but the pound dollar has actually almost got back to where it was before the mini budget since then as well. So I think this shows that there will be fluctuations, but it's just focusing on what we can control during this next period, and it will become a lot more expensive no matter which field we are in. The only last comment actually I would just say is, I think during this period you'll also see the quality companies, the quality businesses, the quality investments really come through. Things will probably go down, but the assets that generate the best returns, that are the best quality, that are the best companies, that generate the best cash flow, these are the ones that will definitely start to stand out during the next few years. And if you can focus in that direction, then there should be plenty of wins to be made.
Great.
Daniel?
I think that a lot of things are going to be dictated by the US and how the global economy responds and reacts. So Jerome Powell, I think in Q1 21, said that quantitative easing won't ease or won't cause inflation. Then Q2 2021, he said some inflation, but it'll be transitory. Then in Q3 21, he said, okay, high inflation, but we are peaking. And there's a whole number of statements that he's made throughout the quarters, and it's almost like he's eating his words. I think that we're heading into a recession if we're not in one already, which I think we are. It's just not going to be announced till next year. I think things are going to become a lot more expensive. They're going to be high levels of unemployment. Cost of living is going to go through the roof. And hopefully people do still have a roof, because it's going to be ugly. It's going to be horrible, and it's going to be devastating. I think the governments are trying to do the best they can. Could they do more? Could they have foreseen what's been happening? Probably yes. But will they admit it? No, because they're the government. And I think we just have to think about ourselves from a selfish angle. What can we do individually to mitigate and minimize the risk that will be coming our way? And I think, it might be worthwhile doing another conversation, because even as of yesterday, 2 days ago, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, announced they're laying off staff. It's the first time that they're doing so. And it's kind of, Mark Zuckerberg said, it's an end to rapid growth. And if a big company like that are making a statement like that, we can expect that other companies will follow suit. So I think it's going to be, very horrible. However, it's not forever, and we should always remember. And I'll share on the Instagram. We'll share on our page. Focus on the things you can control, things you can't. Focus on what you can control.
Great. The last thing I actually want to say, because when I do reflect back on this episode, we are sharing facts, we are sharing the headlines, and a lot of it has been a lot around doom and gloom. But that's what it is. The thing I do want to say, and I want to end with, is we've heard time and time again. I'm speaking to sort of my team, my peers, my investors, that one of the greatest times and periods to create wealth and to amass wealth is during downtimes, is during the next 24 to 36 months. And what I can say is, I know myself, my family, and my team, we are working to apply ourselves to basically make the most of that. And I think there's going to be huge opportunities right across a number of different industries. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn about what's happening, learn about previous recessions, because you can, in the next 24 to 36 months, you can change your life around, your wealth around, by focusing on the things that you can control, by focusing on the opportunities, because you can easily spend your entire day reading all of the doom and gloom headlines. So at least for my generation, the last time we maybe were in a similar situation was university. We didn't have the capital we have today, or the portfolio, or the investments we do today. And so it's very important that whilst we talk about, the sort of what's happening, the challenges, let's not forget there are huge opportunities. This is not financial advice. I think it's just on us and our generation to figure out how we actually capitalize on the opportunities that are there. But we're certainly not going to miss this period. And I think it's on us to make the most of it over the next 24 to 36 months. So, and then with that, I'm sure we'll pick up another one of these episodes at a later stage, because so much is happening. I want to thank the listeners for this episode. I think it's been a really, really great episode to summarize what's happening and share some thoughts. And I'll pass it over to Daniel to close.
So thank you all once again for listening to this episode 151. As always, if you have any feedback, any comments on the state of the economy, what you think is going to happen, or just your thoughts, feel free to jump in our DMs on Instagram at Take Flight Podcast, or just comment on our posts, and let's have a dialogue with all of our other followers, and let's get a diverse perspective and opinion on how we think things are going to play out, and also help one another and educate one another. I think there's power in community. So until next week, until next time, stay safe and God bless.
Take off, take flight.